Greetings Exiles and welcome to yet another build guide video. Do you want to play the character that I had one of the smoothest and easiest league starts with yet? Are you looking for a build which is easy to play but hard to master, that scales heavily with low to mid-tiered gear to ensure you always have enough currency left for other builds? An all-rounder that has been by far the easiest boss killer for me and which works with a huge variety of investment stages and has multiple ways to build the character depending on your liking? Well, then try out my Harvest League starter, the Wintertide Low-Life Block Trickster. Have fun! Wintertide brand has been added to the game in the Harvest League, and since brands are my most favorite skills in the game, I immediately had to try it out, as a league starter of course. This is a low-life energy shield based, cold, damage over time trickster that makes use of 3 directions of scaling boss DPS while maintaining huge defenses with maximum block, a large energy shield pool, and also a lot of recharge. It also features a really great chain of character progression steps and not too easy playstyle, which maybe makes it not the best build for a PoE beginner. And of course, as always, I am using PUB as an assisting tool to show and create this character basically. Within the PUB you can find pretty much a written guide in the notes section. You can find 4 different gear sets for all the stages of the character. You can find all the skill gem setups, the leveling progressions, the Ascendancy, the Pantheon. Well, yeah, pretty much everything you need to know is in the PUB. As far as the footage goes, I'm only showing the recommended endgame gear with around 6 Exalted's investment in the first few days of the league. So if you would build the character later on into the league, it wouldn't even be 6x Exalted. Maybe it would be like, I don't know, like 2 or 3. So yeah, you can get away with a pretty cheap character. I also highly recommend you install the PUB community fork for more advanced settings and more precise calculations. As always, let's start with the strengths first. We are utilizing max block on both spell and attacks, even though it is with only 50% efficiency, but it's still really OP. Then we got a lot of energy shield and a lot of energy shield recharge. Against bosses we will have huge chills, which means you have no problem sustaining your high defense pool as long as you're not face tanking every mechanic. The combination of our Ascendancy, Patient Reaper and Wicked Ward, which is a keystone on the passive tree, means we have an insane amount of energy shield recovery or recharge within maps and also against single targets. We are utilizing damage over time, which means we are never standing still for too long. So this combined with the strong chills makes it extremely easy to dodge mechanics and even kill all bosses. The damage in this build, which is by the way nothing insane, comes from overlapping multiple brands on the same enemy or on different enemies and then remove them with your recall for huge AoE. This build offers a lot of cast speed and a high movement speed, which you get from your Ascendancy, passives, duels and gear to make a really smooth character. You will always have the chance to have multiple brands on either the same or different enemies and different types of situations. So you either focus everything on a single target or you can just clear the full screen. But in order to get the screen coverage, you really have to work for it. You have to replace brands, you have to cast Storms to keep up your buffs, you have to cast Brand Recall in good situations, and you even have to cast your Frostbomb sometimes. So this build is not a lazy build. If you're looking for a lazy build, just hold right click character or whatever, then this is definitely not the build you want to play. Also, another weakness is that the scaling damage-wise is not really easy. Once you got all your base gear, your damage is really good, but to go higher than that, it's usually extremely expensive. Another really annoying thing are Redeemer maps, because there are some mobs with huge amount of cold resistance. So yeah, but other than that, I couldn't find any obvious weaknesses. I already kind of said it, but when it comes to the playstyle, this is actually the biggest disadvantage, at least for me, or what I would think in this build. Because you always have 5 things you want to consistently do in maps. Cast your brands, place Orb of Storms, brand recall, you also have to move and dodge, and you need to place your Vortex. In addition to that, there's Frostbomb, which is kind of like number 6, but you only need that against bosses. So, you can actually auto-cast Vortex just by binding it to your left click, and then if you're using your left click to move, you will always cast your Vortex once it's off cooldown. So, instead of 5 things, only 4 things. Another thing is you constantly have to recast your brands on packs further away from you. So, you don't just want to cast your brands and then only use your brand recall. It doesn't work anymore. You always have to recast your brands. And when encountering a new pack, then you want to place your Orb of Storms onto the pack, to proc Elemental Overload and Elemental Equilibrium, which are 2 huge buffs. And you want to use your brand recall to recall the brands that are, in the perfect case, behind you, still killing mobs. You will then recall them to your new position into the new pack, and because you're removing the brand from the old pack will die from the AoE damage over time, which is special to Wintertide brand. Since I've been using recall for all my other brand builds as well, I'm really used to using it. But it can actually be played without the use of recall, or with even more focus on recall. For example, what I'm usually doing is I'm using the recall when I'm encountering a new pack, when pretty much everything has died behind me already. What you can do with Wintertide is you can run past the packs and then kill the packs with the on removal proc, but that really takes a lot of practice and a lot of experience with the build. So yeah, just some small optimizations there. So experiment and choose whatever you like. Against bosses or tougher targets, you always want to stay close to most bosses, depending on the mechanics of course, for easy Vortex and Orb of Storms uptime. Staying close to bosses also means that you're essentially a lot faster, or it is a lot easier for you to dodge mechanics. Why? Because your angular velocity on the circle around the boss is a lot higher if the distance between you and the boss is much smaller. So if you're closer to the boss and then you move 1 meter, you also have a wide angle that you're moving. So if he's firing a skill shot, you don't really have to move, you just have to move just a little bit to dodge the skill shot. Whereas if you're far away, and if the boss is firing a skill shot, if you only move a meter, you might still get hit by the skill shot because of the skill shot's width. So just some side note here, also against Sirus, most players have problems against Sirus because they're standing far away. Just pretty much stand right next to him, and then once he starts a mechanic, just move 5 centimeters to the left or to the right, whatever. But yeah, I want to talk about the build in this video, not about how to kill bosses. So yeah, Wintertide. On the boss, you want a minimum of at least 4 brands out. 3 of them will attach, and the 4th one will replace the first one once it expires. You do never want to place another brand if you already got 6 out, if your 6 is maximum. So essentially, you never want to put down an additional one if you already have your maximum amount of brands out in single target situations. As soon as the amount drops to 3, because Wintertide brand can attach 2 brands on one enemy, and then we got the node on the tree that lets us attach an additional one, so we get up to 3. You want to place new ones. What I sometimes did, but not always, because sometimes it's, a little bit annoying to set up. You can get into a rhythm, so you're constantly dealing damage while not standing still, because you do not have to replace 3 brands at once, but only one. So you place a brand, place a brand, place a brand, and then place a brand, so on the 4th, and then you got like, I don't know, like a second or two to move around, and then the first one expires, you refresh that one, and then you move around, then the second expires, you refresh, and then you can move around again. So yeah, there are a lot of optimizations in the playstyle that you can do, but for most content, actually for no content, I really had to do that, because PoE is quite an easy game once you got into it. I already talked a little bit about how Wintertide brand works, so with the 3 instead of 2 maximum brands on a target and this, but yeah. The next section might be a bit math heavy, but it is actually really important to understand my scaling decisions in this build and to understand how the skill itself is scaling. It is not necessary to know that if you're playing the build, just if you want to improve the build or pretty much make it your own build. Okay, so Wintertide brand gains stages while attached to an enemy. Each stage adds the same amount of damage, meaning you got a linear growth of DPS against single targets. So let's say with one stage you deal 100 DPS, and then with 10 stages you will deal 1000 DPS. The maximum base amount of stages is 20, and the rate of gaining stages scales with cast speed. On duration and or removal of the brand, with brand recall for example, the DPS of the stages at the point of time when it got removed will tick for a secondary duration as an area of effect. So this is where most of your AoE in maps comes from. So in order to deal the AoE damage, you either need a lot of cast speed or you want to remove the brands frequently, which, or the target dies, by the way, which is actually not a real factor in maps because stuff dies fast enough, so we are not focusing on AoE clear when we are maximizing the build. Instead, we want to maximize the part of 20 stages over the duration of a brand for the maximum single target DPS. What this means is, in addition to just scaling the damage of each stage, which by the way is the number you see in PoE, you can scale skill effect duration and cast speed for better DPS, which we both scale, and this is also why we are building it as a Trickster over an Occultist. As I already said, you only see the damage for each stage in the PoE, depending on the PoE version, but yeah, so there's a huge trap. If you only scale the PoE damage, you will most likely end up with a lot less damage than when scaling all the 3 dimensions, which are the pure damage, cast speed, and skill effect duration. The calculations and all the graphs and all I talked about in this section do not cover 100% of the scaling and skill interactions, but it's most of the stuff that I needed in order to scale the build to some really, really nice DPS. Okay, now comes something not that heavy on math or understanding or whatever. The leveling, which is actually very, very easy. You can start with the usual freezing pulse and frostbomb setups, and on level 12 and onwards you can use Wintertide. But since Wintertide doesn't have really good links early on, you can also just start Wintertide at level 18 when you get the first 3 really nice support gems for it. As far as Ascendancy goes, I went for Patient Reaper first for some nice damage, then I choose Ghost Dance for defense and speed, and then I personally went for Escape Artist for more defense and speed, and then Prolonged Pain for huge damage multi. You can swap Escape Artist and Prolonged Pain around if you feel like you need more damage, but yeah, I didn't feel like I needed that more, so I went Escape Artist as my third choice here. As far as Bandit goes, you will just kill all for the 2 passives. More info on leveling gems and gem setups and links and all that, as well as the passive tree progression, which you can, by the way, select in the bottom left drop down menu in the tree window in the PoE. And the Ascendancy progression can be found within the path of building, as I said. Progression trees down in the left drop-down menu, and the rest should be in the notes. The PoE doesn't only feature all of the before-mentioned things, but also different gear setups. In this build we have 4 different setups. The first one is the League start as a life-based character, because you usually don't have that good energy shield gear in the League start. Then you would have the League start once you are on energy shield, so you made the swap from life to energy shield as primary defense. And then you got the endgame low life with block and dual setups. And then you have some min-maxed examples of low life gear, which, you know, are only examples. I actually never played with them. So yeah, the full focus and all the footage and everything I'm talking about, and yeah, the build is about, or the guide is about, will focus on the endgame gear setup that I talked about earlier on for around 6 exalted in the beginning of the league. Information about all the others can be found within the PoE, as always. Let's talk about the gear now and some uniques. There's actually only one mandatory unique in the endgame that you want to have, which is the Chevron's wrappings as your chest piece. If you didn't know, chaos damage always bypasses energy shield, which means if you have like 4k life and 4k energy shield and you take 1k in chaos damage, it will only drop your life. So if you take 4k chaos damage, which is on your life pool, you will be dead. And instead, if you take 4k of any other damage type, it will go onto your energy shield. So chaos damage normally bypasses energy shield, which will be blocked by this chest piece. The last line says chaos damage does not bypass energy shield, which means we will then be allowed to use blood magic plus hatred to reserve 98% of our life. So we will have basically no life, our whole defense will be energy shield, and this chest protects us from being basically one shot from any chaos damage source. Other than that, when it comes to uniques, there is the presence of Chayula, a lot of life conversion to energy shield, which means a lot of energy shield in the end, a lot of chaos resistance, and because we are not CI, the chaos resistance is quite important. It has all attributes as an implicit, which is really nice, you know. You need all 3 attributes in this build, because intelligence is your defense, and then you need strength and dex for your gems. But the line that says cannot be stunned is quite important here. Even though we get partial immunity from stuns from our Ascendancy, while we have Ghost Shrouds, we will not always have full uptime on Ghost Shrouds, especially if you're fighting a pack, like if you're diving into a pack and then you get a few hits, and then you could be stunned, and then if you're stunned you can't do anything and then you might die. So this is really, really nice. If you want to go for a rare version of an amulet, which is totally viable, there are examples within the PoE. Another unique item, which is the last unique item that I'm using in my main gear, is the Crown of the Inward Eye. You can ignore the enchant on there. I just tried to enchant it. I got a cyclone damage. I don't need that one. You want different enchants, which can be found in PoE and all that. And what you're looking out for on here is actually the only role, the percentage increased max life, mana, and global energy shield. The transfigurations is basically TLDR. You get a lot of energy shield and a lot of damage from it, but no resistances. So keep that in mind once you swap from a rare to this one, that this one doesn't have resistances on there. And now let's have a look at the rare items. Apart from the wand and the shield, it's pretty much always resistances and as much energy shield as possible, and if you need attributes. So the gloves, resistances, energy shield. Rings, resistances, energy shield. othering, resistances, energy shield, dexterity. Belt, sorry. Resistances, energy shield, strength. Boots, resistances, energy shield, int, and movement speed. And then we have the shield, which again, resistances, energy shield, and on this one, you can actually have some offensive rolls. You can have +1 of all cold spell skill gems that I have on here. You can have something like cast speed. You can have spell crit, which is not really necessary, but would be necessary if you're going for the min-max version. But yeah, for the beginning, just get the +1 to all cold spell skill gems and then energy shield and resistances. Once you are on the block stage of the character, you also want to have a T1 chance to block spell damage on there, which will then cap out our block chance for spells. Quite important and quite high defense from this item. And then you got the wand. This is a really, really bad wand. But this was actually enough to carry a lot of Sirus 8, to carry me through all the content, Awakening 8, fully juiced maps and all that. So yeah. The character itself is strong enough, so you don't need a really strong weapon, even though it is quite easy to get a better one. So here you can see an example of a better weapon, which has, cast speed, +1, damage over time multi, another damage over time multi, spell damage, or cold damage, The only thing that you do not want to have on your wand is cold damage added to spells. If you have that, it's basically worthless for this build. So keep that in mind. The jewels along with the chevrons wrappings we are using are actually the main things that you need once you are upgrading your build. So I already talked about the chefs, but now I want to talk about the unique jewels. We are going to use 2 Thread of Hopes. One down here, this is the Templar Stud, so right next to the Templar Stud, we want to use a Thread of Hope with a very large ring. This allows us to spec out of some nodes here and get a lot of additional nodes right here for damage, cast speed, ES, then glancing blows, which will then enable us to go for block. So once you got this Thread of Hope jewel, then you want to go for a block on your gear and all that. And once you got the second Thread of Hope, which is a large ring up here, you can then finalize the build, because in between these 2 stages, or actually 3 stages if you count the one in where I don't have a single one of these, you might have to swap around some things on the passive tree. But don't worry, in the PoE you can find all the different versions of passive trees that I've been using for each step of character progression. So the more important one is this one down here, because this one is a lot of defense from the block, and this one is a lot of offense from Heart of Ice, Breath of Rime, and then some energy shield nodes down here, and the intelligence there, and some damage and resistances over here. Another unique jewel would be a energy from within. This basically means that these nodes that are life and energy shield will only be energy shield if you socket it into this socket. So some nice energy shield here, and you obviously want to have one with 6% if you go for min-maxing, but as I said, this was the first character of the league, and I pretty much bought whatever I could get. For a rare jewel, you got quite a few stats here that you want to look out for. Increased maximum energy shield is basically the best defensive modifier on here, and if you want to go for offense, cold damage over time multi, cast speed, cold damage, damage over time, or just only damage, like increased damage, everything works, so you got a lot of possible rolls here. As far as enchants goes, you saw that I wasn't using any of them. So these are more like min-maxing if you really want to get the last bit out of a character. For a helm, I suggest Wintertide max stages for better single target DPS, or 40% damage for less of a single target as boost, but higher consistency in maps as well. On the gloves, I always recommend Reflection, because it is sometimes a really strong defensive boost, kind of like a taunting totem without the taunt, so bosses or whatever could focus your reflection. And then on the boots, I always, or pretty much always, choose movement speed if you did not get hit recently. The problem in this build is that you quite often get hit because of my playstyle. I like to go in melee range, even though you don't really have to do that. So another choice would be attack and cast speed if you have killed recently. But all about the enchants is written down within the PoE notes section as well. As far as flasks go, I went for a full utility and defensive setup. The first flask in here is a Rumi's Concoction Granite Flask. Granite Flask, always super strong, 3k armor, really nice physical damage mitigation there, but the Rumi's Concoction also gives you block. And because we are going for max block on both attack and spell, this is really, really strong. You focus on the spell block roll on here because attack block is being covered by your shield and your passives on the tree. Other than that, for maps you want to use a Quicksilver Flask. Movement speed means map clear in most cases, and map clear is 95% of the time you spend in PoE, so really valuable. Then you want Onslaught somewhere. I got it on my Silver Flask. Onslaught grants you increased attack, move, and cast speed. Cast speed is damage, movement speed is map clear, so it's both damage and map clear, really important. You also want the reduced flask charges used as a prefix, which is the Chemist's, which means you only consume 30 of 60 charges, which basically means you can use it twice against bosses. Other than that, because I am face first playstyle, sorry for that, I'm using a Quartz Flask, which grants phasing, so I can freely move in between packs. Like when I'm inside the pack, I cannot get stuck if this flask is up. And then I also went for a Jade Flask. Evasion is defense. You can go for a Sulfur Flask here or whatever you want, maybe a second Quicksilver Flask if you feel like you're running out of Quicksilver Flask charges or whatever. What's really important is you want Bleed, Freeze, and Curse immunity on here for mapping. Why no Ignite immunity? This is actually because Ignite is only really important if you do not have any other way of recovering your energy shield, like we actually do. We are fully based on energy shield recharge, which is being blocked by an Ignite. So if you're ignited for 10 seconds, then your energy shield recharge will not start during that duration. But we are using Patient Reaper and Wicked Ward, which makes up for it. But keep that in mind if you're fighting a boss and you know, oh my god, it's like a Phoenix or something where you get often or ignited a lot, then you might want to change a flask to Ignite Flask, or maybe change your Pantheon just for that. If you're not on Energy Shield yet, you obviously want to have a Life Flask with an instant roll. So the first instant roll there is the Seething prefix modifier, and the other one is Bubbling. So you want either one of these, and then whatever immunity you still want on there as a suffix would be preferable. Let's talk about the anointments. There are quite a few things you can change and take here, depending on the state of the character, which jewels you have, and are you already on low life or not. Examples and what you would like to use you can see here or in the PoE notes. But basically, early game I always go with freedom of movement. It is super cheap, grants phasing and movement speed, pretty much everything you want early on this character. Later on, as I said, depends on the state of your character and what you want. Brand equity is what I went with, but mental rapidity or growth and decay are good options for damage and utility as well. For defense, you want something with energy shield recharge, evasion, dodge, movement speed, or some block if you need more. Okay, I really want to finish up this video because it's getting really dark outside. So yeah, let's go over the links. The first link I want to go over is the main link, the 6-linked Wintertide. Link to efficacy, control destruction, and hypothermia. This is your main 4-link. Your 5th link would be Swift Affliction, and even though it has reduced duration, it is still a really strong damage multiplier. And my last link was Elemental Focus. Why Elemental Focus last, even though it is 49% more damage multi? Because before you got all your defenses set up, before you got good gear and block and everything, your chill that comes from your Wintertide is actually going to be a really strong defensive boost. If you do not want to use Elemental Focus, then you could also use Empower. Really nice, Empower level 3 or level 4. Or you could use Faster Casting. Faster Casting again makes the build even more good, like it just feels better if you use that. Increased duration, boss DPS, but I really do not recommend increased duration. If you have a red socket, go for an Empower. And you can also try out Swiftbrand support in maps. I've been playing around with Swiftbrand a lot, but I personally didn't like it, but you should really try it out yourself. The first 4-link I want to talk about, and as always we have 3 4-links, and it doesn't matter if this setup is in the helmet, in the gloves or in the boots. You just want to have the links wherever you can get them the easiest. So the first 4-link is our Overstorms, then linked with Curse on Hit, Frostbite and increased critical strikes. The Overstorms is important in order to proc our Elemental Overload and Elemental Equilibrium. It is a lightning spell and Wintertide is cold, so we always have Elemental Equilibrium up. We are using increased critical strikes to even have a better uptime on Elemental Overload, because you will most likely have maybe only one crit modifier on your gear or your Turi or whatever, which means that without increased critical strikes, you will not have 100% uptime on Elemental Overload if you're only using Overstorms. Curse on Hit, Frostbite is actually the most damage you can get, like the most consistent damage. If you want a mix of some damage and also survivability, you could go for a Temporal Chains. Temporal Chains would also be my go-to choice if I had an Awakened Curse on Hit level 5 or higher, because then you could apply 2 curses, so Frostbite and Temporal Chains. You would then socket out increased critical strikes, and you would look for a roll on your weapon or on your shield for increased critical strike chance for spells to make up for the increased critical strike support. The second 4-link for me in the gloves is Flame Dash, Arcane Surge level 7, Second Wind and Brand Recall. Flame Dash is your main movement ability, so if you have to dodge something, if you have to react to something really fast, which can be done with movement, you are going to use your Flame Dash. Second Wind will add another cooldown use and will reduce the cooldown use, and the Arcane Surge level 7 is only on level 7 because it will be procced by only one single Flame Dash use. In my case, Flame Dash is 37 mana cost, and Arcane Surge needs 32 mana to proc. You can go for a higher Arcane Surge, and then you have to experiment on how many times you are Flame Dashing to see how much uptime you have on Arcane Surge buff, which is a really strong damage buff, so do not level it too high. You also have the Brand Recall in here because it also benefits from the cooldown recovery speed from the Second Wind. If you're one of these players that do not want to use Brand Recall, you can also just put a Faster Casting in there to support your Flame Dash with. The last 4-link is up here, in my case in our helmet, and these are 3 auras linked to an Enlighten. Before you are on Energy Shield, you don't really have to use Discipline, and what I did was I was only leveling Malevolence and I was leveling Clarity to like level 20, or depending on whatever you have, because then you have more mana for Clarity. Once you go for Energy Shield and once you go for a block, you can then also use a Discipline, and then what I did was I leveled a Clarity from level 1 until I felt comfortable again with mana, and in my case I ended up with a Clarity level 13. The reason why I just said the things about blocking and stuff is Mystic Bulwark. Once you got block and once you got Mystic Bulwark, you don't need that high of a clarity. So as I said, I recommend before you go on energy shield, level up your discipline, but do not activate it. Activate your malevolence and a high level clarity. In the shield we have a 3-link that is Vortex, Bone Chill and Unbound Ailments. The Vortex in this build is not there to deal damage, even though it deals some damage, but we are not focusing on Vortex damage, we are focusing on Bone Chill. Because what this does is, the more the enemy gets chilled by a Vortex, the more cold damage it takes. And because of that, we also take Unbound Ailments in here. So Vortex chills, base 10%, and then you go for the Bone Chill support, which increases the damage by the chill effect, and then you are going to increase the chill effect. So Vortex is pretty much the source of chill in our build. Once we have Elemental Focus, Wintertide Brand cannot chill anymore, and also a damage buff. But because you don't need that much damage during maps, what I usually did was, instead of using Unbound Ailments, I've just been running around with a portal in here, just for saving up the portal scrolls. The last 3 sockets for me were in my weapon. I have a Blood Magic with my Hatred here. Blood Magic only has to be level 19, it does not have to be level 20. And really important to note here as well is that if it's level 18, you are most likely not going to be able to activate your Hatred, because then the mana multiplier on there will be too high and you cannot reserve more than 99.99999% of your life. So yeah, you need it to be at least level 19. You don't need it on level 20, and I actually couldn't do it because I wouldn't have enough strength. And remember, you can level up your Hatred, you can level up your Blood Magic, but unless you have a chefs, do not activate them. Otherwise you will not have any life and you will die instantly from chaos damage. In the last socket, I simply have Frostbomb. Frostbomb applies the cold exposure for minus 25% cold resistance, so you place it on bosses for a nice boss damage boost. The last thing before I wrap up the build guide is going to be explaining why the heck are we playing low life instead of just pure life or pure energy shield with CI or a hybrid version. The biggest reason is damage. Like, when you go low life, that means that you can reserve your life because you want to go low life. That means we can use another aura, in our case Hatred, for the 19% more damage multi. Something else is Pain Attunement itself. It says 30% more spell damage when on low life, so another really high damage multiplicator. Other than that, I really wanted to play Energy Shield because on damage over time skills, especially on damage over time spells, it is usually really hard to regain your defense or life, to regain life, because you cannot leech from damage over time, except for Essence Drain, but that's something different. So I wanted to go Energy Shield and then low life because of the damage. If you want to go for even more tankiness, then you would not go for low life, you would go probably CI for a lot higher Energy Shield on your chest. But I already have 8.6k, which in my opinion is more than enough Energy Shield for all the content. My damage is really good, which you can see in the last, or not really good, but it's way more than enough to kill all bosses, which you can see at the end of the video. And now the really last thing I want to talk about in this build guide is Pantheon. For most builds, it's not really important, and that's no different in this one. For Major, I went for Lunaris because you're usually really close to enemies, at least for my playstyle. If you do not have a Chayula's Amulet, a Presence of Chayula, you can also go Brine King if you have problems with stuns. And for bosses, I recommend Solaris. As Major Gods, I went for Shakari because for longest duration Chaos damage was actually my only problem, the only thing that really sometimes killed me, because while you have a poison on you, you are not going to recharge your energy shield, so I went for this. If you do not want to go for that, you can go for Sual of Gruthkul. Because as I said, you're getting close and you're getting hit quite a few times. This is another nice defensive boost, or you can go for Sword of Aberrath, the same reason as you would go for Sword of Shakari if ignites are killing you instead of poisons. And this wraps up the build guide video for my Wintertide brand lowlife block Trickster. This build was really fun, and as a league starter it was exceptionally fast, cheap and also strong. I've been doing Sirus carries pretty much as soon as I killed my Sirus for the first time, so at like day 2 or day 3 of the league. So yeah, a lot of potential in the build that's quite cheap but not that easy to play. If you have any suggestions about the video or about the channel, please leave them down in the comments below, and maybe you would also like to join our Discord, where you can talk to other players that are hopefully currently playing this build or other builds, maybe do some trades, some services, whatever. We are currently building the community, so everybody is welcome as long as you're a nice person. Thank you very much for watching. Please like the video if you liked it, dislike, let me know if you disliked it, and subscribe to my channel here. I'm also going to stream, usually only during league starts, but make sure to leave a follow on my twitch.tv/play_like_J. Thank you very much. See you on the next one. I am Jay, and I'm out. Yeah, I've done multiple Sirus deathlists on this. I actually did 7 Sirus, and I died once. And that was when I went back into the die beam. Like, I was safe and then I went back inside. So yeah, the DPS doesn't matter if you know what you're doing in the fight. What's my next build going to be? I will see. I was planning on an Ice Crash Raider. Okay.
The others found strength in their projections. They became reliant on them.
Low on mana.
I am not so foolish. Die.
Like, yeah, DPS is nothing special, but it's extremely safe. Because you got like a 50% chill on him. Wow, that's not fair. Enough space? Maybe not. Should be enough space. I'm going to push that storm to the right.
Life really interesting enough to warrant all this pain.
I basically got like, I don't know, half a second extra because of the chill to react. Which is more than enough. As you can see. Like, I didn't get hit by anything yet.
This city is nothing. Why resist?
Okay, I'm pushing away the storm already. That's nice. Always remember, last phase he's not teleporting, he's attacking immediately. So always jump once he's ready.
Just need a moment to catch my breath.
And you can take your time in here. Like, if you have 20% movement speed boots, it's easy.
Feel the thrill of
The void, everlasting fire. Die.
Just takes fucking no damage while in the corridor. It's so annoying. Like, even if you dodge everything.
Everlasting fire.
Where is he? There he is.
Non-existence. Die. Beyond, there is only
Yeah, as I said, nothing special DPS wise. Just super safe. You can wait until he says something. Boom.
everlasting fire.
Don't get too close to him
No
here.
mana.
Oh, that's really bad positioning.
I
Yeah, so
something.
level 20 gems. Nothing special. 6 exalteds into the character. I got hit once, but yeah.